Welcome to Betrayed Hearts Chronicles. It started with a flyer pinned to the bulletin board at the coffee shop. Jennifer was in her usual corner seat, sipping a lukewarm latte as she scrolled through her phone. Between job postings and household reminders, her days felt like an endless blur of monotony. But the bold font on the flyer caught her attention. Seeking models for local photography project. No experience necessary. Capture your unique story through my lens. The words lingered in her mind longer than they should have. She wasn't a model, not by any stretch of the imagination. At 39, with 2 kids and a marriage that had become more of a business arrangement than a romance, she felt invisible. The idea of being seen, of being someone's focus, stirred something deep inside her. When she called the number, she didn't expect much. A man answered, a voice warm and resonant, with a hint of curiosity. "Ethan here," he said. "Ethan," she repeated. "I saw your flyer at the coffee shop. Are you still looking for models?" "Always," he replied, a smile evident in his tone. "Do you have any experience?" "None," Jennifer admitted, then quickly added, "but I'm interested in the project." "Perfect," Ethan said without hesitation. "Can you meet me at my studio tomorrow? We'll talk more and see if this is a fit." The next day, Jennifer stood outside a small brick building downtown. The words Ethan Hayes Photography were etched on a sleek sign above the door. She hesitated before stepping inside, her heart racing with a mix of excitement and nerves. The studio was a minimalist space, flooded with natural light. Large framed photographs adorned the walls, each one striking in its emotional intensity. A man stood near the far end of the room, adjusting a camera on a tripod. "Ethan?" Jennifer asked hesitantly. He turned, and for a moment, she forgot to breathe. Ethan was in his early 40s with an effortless charm. His dark hair was slightly tousled, and his hazel eyes lit up when he smiled. "You must be Jennifer," he said, striding over to greet her. "Thanks for coming in." He offered his hand, and when their fingers touched, Jennifer felt an unexpected spark. Ethan began by asking about her life, where she was from, what she did, and what had drawn her to the flyer. Jennifer found herself opening up in a way she hadn't expected, sharing snippets of her frustrations and her desire to rediscover herself. "I think this could be exactly what you're looking for," Ethan said, his voice warm and encouraging. "My goal is to capture authenticity, who you are, not just what you look like. If you're willing to trust me, I think we can create something amazing together." Jennifer felt her cheeks flush under his gaze. "I've never done anything like this before," she admitted. "That's the point," Ethan said with a grin. "Sometimes stepping out of your comfort zone is exactly what you need." Before she left, Ethan took a few preliminary shots to get a sense of her presence on camera. As she stood under the soft glow of the studio lights, she felt self-conscious at first. But Ethan's gentle guidance and easy manner put her at ease. "Beautiful," he murmured as he clicked the shutter. Jennifer couldn't remember the last time she'd felt beautiful. That night, as she lay in bed beside her husband, Mark, who was already snoring softly, Jennifer stared at the ceiling. Ethan's words echoed in her mind, and for the first time in years, she felt the faint stirrings of something she thought she'd lost: hope. Jennifer returned to Ethan's studio the following week for her first official session. Her nerves were palpable as she walked through the door, clutching a bag of outfits Ethan had suggested she bring. "You came back," Ethan said with a smile, his voice warm and welcoming. "I wasn't sure I would," Jennifer admitted, her hands fidgeting with the strap of her bag. "I'm glad you did," he said, stepping closer. "Let's get started. No pressure. Just take it at your own pace." The session began simply. Ethan guided her through different poses, his voice calm and encouraging. He'd stop occasionally to adjust the lighting or offer a suggestion, but his demeanor was never overbearing. "Relax your shoulders," he said at one point, stepping closer. His hands hovered just above her arms, not quite touching. "Like this." Jennifer exhaled deeply, feeling the tension drain from her body as she followed his guidance. "Perfect," Ethan murmured, stepping back to capture the moment through his lens. For the first time in years, Jennifer felt seen. Not as a mother or a wife, but as herself. As the session went on, their conversation grew more personal. Ethan asked about her life with genuine curiosity, and Jennifer found herself opening up. "Photography must be such a creative outlet," she said during a break, sipping from a bottle of water. "It is," Ethan replied. "But it's more than that. It's about connection. Capturing the things people don't even realize they're showing." Jennifer laughed softly. "Sounds like a superpower." "Maybe," he said with a grin. "Or maybe it's just about paying attention." His words hung in the air, the weight of his gaze sending a shiver down her spine. She felt her cheeks flush and quickly looked away, hoping he hadn't noticed. The tension between them grew more palpable with each session. It was in the way Ethan's hands would linger a second longer than necessary when adjusting her posture, or the way his compliments seemed to carry an unspoken meaning. "Beautiful," he said one afternoon as she posed in front of a soft gray backdrop. Jennifer's heart skipped a beat. "You keep saying that," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "Because it's true," Ethan said, lowering his camera to meet her eyes. The intensity of his gaze made her chest tighten. She wanted to respond, to deflect, but words failed her. That evening, as Jennifer left the studio, Ethan walked her to her car. The late autumn air was crisp, and the soft glow of streetlights illuminated their path. "Thanks for today," Jennifer said, her voice tinged with nervous energy. "You don't have to thank me," Ethan replied. "You're the one bringing the magic to these photos." Jennifer laughed softly, her breath visible in the cold air. "You're too kind." Ethan reached out, his hand brushing against hers as he opened the car door. The touch was brief but electric, sending a jolt through her body. Their eyes met, and for a moment the world seemed to stand still. Then, as quickly as it had happened, the moment passed. Jennifer slipped into the driver's seat, her heart pounding as Ethan stepped back. "Drive safe," he said, his voice soft but steady. "Thanks," Jennifer replied, her voice trembling slightly. As she drove home, her mind replayed the day's events. Ethan's touch, his words, his gaze. They lingered like an unspoken promise, a spark waiting to ignite. Jennifer found herself looking forward to her sessions with Ethan more than she cared to admit. They had become a highlight in her otherwise routine days, a space where she felt appreciated, seen, and alive. Her husband, Mark, had barely noticed her newfound enthusiasm, chalking it up to the hobby she'd mentioned in passing. At the studio, the atmosphere between Jennifer and Ethan grew increasingly charged. The way he looked at her, through the lens or directly, made her pulse race. His compliments, once professional, now carried a warmth that left her questioning her own emotions. One afternoon, as Ethan adjusted the lighting for a new set, Jennifer changed into a flowing red dress he'd suggested for the shoot. The fabric hugged her curves in a way that made her feel both exposed and empowered. When she stepped out of the changing room, Ethan froze. His eyes swept over her, and for a moment, his professional demeanor faltered. "You look incredible," he said, his voice softer than usual. Jennifer flushed under his gaze. "Thanks," she replied, smoothing the fabric nervously. Ethan stepped closer, adjusting a stray strand of her hair. His fingers brushed against her cheek, a touch so light it could have been accidental, but it lingered just long enough to make her heart skip a beat. "Let's get started," he said, his voice thick with something unspoken. During the session, Ethan's instructions felt more intimate, his presence more magnetic. He directed her poses with subtle touches, a hand on her shoulder, a gentle press against her lower back. Each contact sent a spark through her, a sensation she couldn't ignore. At one point, as Jennifer adjusted her position, her hand accidentally grazed Ethan's. They both froze, their eyes meeting. "Sorry," she said quickly, her cheeks burning. "Don't be," Ethan replied, his voice low. The moment stretched, the air between them heavy with tension. Finally, Ethan stepped back, breaking the spell. But the connection lingered, unspoken but undeniable. After the session, As Jennifer gathered her things, Ethan walked over to her. "I've been thinking," he began, his tone hesitant but earnest. "You have a natural presence in front of the camera. I'd like to explore some more personal themes with you, if you're comfortable with that." Jennifer tilted her head. "What do you mean by personal themes?" "More about your story," Ethan explained. "Who you are, what makes you feel alive. I think there's so much more to capture." Jennifer hesitated. The idea was enticing, but it also felt like crossing a line she wasn't sure she should approach. "I'll think about it," she said finally. "Take your time," Ethan replied, his smile warm. But as he opened the door for her, his hand brushed against hers again. This time, neither of them moved away. Driving home that evening, Jennifer couldn't stop replaying the day's events in her mind. Ethan's touches, his words, his gaze. It all lingered, leaving her both exhilarated and conflicted. At home, Mark was already in bed, his focus on his laptop rather than her. Jennifer stood in the doorway of their bedroom, the gap between them feeling wider than ever. As she climbed into bed, she glanced at her phone, half hoping for a message from Ethan. The realization startled her. She was craving something from him, something she hadn't felt in years. The line between professional and personal had blurred, and Jennifer wasn't sure she wanted to pull it back into focus. The tension between Jennifer and Ethan had reached a breaking point. Every session felt like walking a tightrope, their stolen glances and lingering touches daring one of them to take the next step. Jennifer told herself it was nothing, that it could still be professional, but deep down, she knew that wasn't true. The turning point came when Ethan texted her one evening. "I'd love to grab a coffee with you sometime. No cameras, no studio, just us. What do you think?" Jennifer stared at the message, her heart racing. She knew what this invitation meant, what it implied. But her fingers hovered over the screen for only a moment before she replied. "Okay." When? They met at a cozy cafe on the edge of downtown, far enough from her neighborhood to feel safe but close enough to make her arrival seem casual. Jennifer arrived first, nerves twisting in her stomach as she sipped her latte and scanned the room. When Ethan walked in, she felt her breath hitch. He looked effortlessly handsome in a dark sweater and jeans, his hair slightly tousled. His eyes lit up when he saw her, and she felt that familiar flutter in her chest. "Jennifer," he said warmly as he slid into the seat across from her. "Thanks for meeting me. I wasn't sure I should," she admitted, her voice soft. "And yet, here you are," Ethan replied with a smile that made her stomach flip. Their conversation flowed easily, just as it always had in the studio, but without the constraints of professionalism, it took on a different tone. Ethan asked about her life, what she dreamed of, what she feared, and what had led her to his flyer in the first place. "I guess I just wanted to feel alive again," Jennifer confessed, her voice trembling slightly. Ethan reached across the table, his hand brushing hers. "You deserve to feel that way every day," he said, his eyes locking onto hers. Jennifer's heart raced as the weight of his words settled over her. She should have pulled her hand away, should have set boundaries, but she didn't. After they finished their drinks, Ethan offered to walk her to her car. The late afternoon sun bathed the streets in a warm glow, and Jennifer felt a strange sense of peace despite the turmoil in her mind. When they reached her car, she turned to thank him, but Ethan stepped closer, the space between them shrinking to nothing. "I've been wanting to tell you something," he said, his voice low and steady. Jennifer's pulse quickened. "What is it?" Ethan hesitated, his eyes searching hers. "I haven't been able to stop thinking about you," he admitted. Jennifer felt her breath catch. She wanted to respond, but her words stuck in her throat. Then Ethan leaned in, his lips brushing against hers in a tentative, almost questioning kiss. The world seemed to stop as Jennifer's body betrayed her hesitation, her lips parting to meet his. The kiss deepened, slow and deliberate, sending a rush of warmth through her that she hadn't felt in years. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathless. Ethan rested his forehead against hers, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry. I couldn't help myself." Jennifer's cheeks flushed as she stepped back, her hand reaching for the car door. "I should go," she said, her voice trembling. Ethan nodded, his expression unreadable. Of course. Driving home, Jennifer was overwhelmed by a flood of emotions. Guilt, excitement, fear. When she walked through the door, Mark was in the living room, engrossed in a basketball game. "Hey," he said without looking up. "Hey," Jennifer replied, her voice unsteady. As she sat down beside him, the memory of Ethan's kiss replayed in her mind. A secret she wasn't sure she wanted to keep or let go of. Jennifer tried to stay away from Ethan after the kiss. She told herself it was a mistake, a moment of weakness, and that she had to focus on her marriage. But Ethan's presence lingered like a shadow, and her resolve crumbled with every text he sent. "I can't stop thinking about you. I need to see you again." Each message pulled her deeper into the web they'd spun together, and before she realized it, she had agreed to meet him at his apartment. The door to Ethan's apartment opened, revealing a space that was equal parts elegant and cozy. Jennifer stepped inside, her heart racing as she took in the dark leather furniture, the minimalist art on the walls, and the faint scent of his cologne. "I'm glad you came," Ethan said, closing the door behind her. "I don't know why I'm here," Jennifer admitted, her voice trembling. Ethan stepped closer, his gaze steady. "I think you do." Jennifer's breath caught as he reached out, his hand brushing a stray strand of hair from her face. His touch was gentle but deliberate, and the warmth of his palm sent a shiver down her spine. The kiss that followed was inevitable. Ethan's lips found hers with a hunger that mirrored her own, their bodies pressing together as years of pent-up longing erupted. His hands roamed her back, pulling her closer, while Jennifer's fingers tangled in his hair. They moved together like they had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times, Ethan guiding her toward the couch as his lips trailed down her neck. Jennifer let out a soft gasp, her hands gripping his shoulders as she felt herself give in completely. "You're incredible," Ethan murmured against her skin, his voice thick with desire. Jennifer's mind raced, a whirlwind of emotions. Guilt, excitement, fear, and something deeper she couldn't name. Clothes fell to the floor in a blur, their bodies finding each other with an urgency that left no room for hesitation. Ethan's touch was electric, his movements unhurried yet deliberate, as though he wanted to memorize every inch of her. Jennifer felt more alive than she had in years, her senses heightened as they came together. The world outside disappeared, leaving only the heat of his skin against hers and the rhythm of their shared breath. Afterward, they lay entwined on the couch, the soft glow of the city lights filtering through the windows. Ethan traced lazy circles on her bare shoulder, his touch tender and grounding. "Are you okay?" he asked softly, his voice laced with concern. Jennifer nodded, though her mind was a storm of conflicting thoughts. "I don't know what this means," she admitted. "It means we have something real," Ethan said, his hand cupping her face. "Something worth exploring." Jennifer closed her eyes, tears prickling at the corners. She wanted to believe him, wanted to stay in this moment forever, but the weight of her choices pressed heavily on her chest. That night, as Jennifer drove home, she felt a pang of guilt so sharp it made her stomach churn. She parked in the driveway and sat there for a long time, staring at the warm glow of the house she shared with Mark. When she finally stepped inside, Mark was asleep on the couch, a faint snore punctuating the silence. Jennifer stood there, watching him, her heart aching with the knowledge of what she had done. She climbed into bed alone, her mind replaying every moment with Ethan. She knew she had crossed a line, one that couldn't be uncrossed. But as she closed her eyes, the memory of his touch lingered, a bittersweet reminder of the life she had chosen to leave behind, if only for a moment. Jennifer's affair with Ethan quickly became a regular part of her life, a secret woven into the fabric of her days. What started as occasional stolen moments turned into a rhythm of planned encounters, lunch breaks, afternoons when Mark was at work, or evenings when he was glued to his laptop. Each meeting with Ethan felt like stepping into another world, one where she wasn't a wife or a mother, but simply a woman desired and cherished. Yet, with every touch and every kiss, The weight of her betrayal grew heavier. Ethan's apartment became their sanctuary. Its modern yet cozy decor and the warm glow of his lamps created a cocoon where Jennifer felt free to shed her inhibitions. Ethan would greet her at the door with a kiss that left no room for hesitation, pulling her into his arms as if he couldn't wait another moment. "You have no idea how much I've missed you," he murmured one afternoon, his hands framing her face. Jennifer smiled, leaning into his touch. "I think I do," she replied, her voice soft but tinged with guilt. Their connection deepened beyond the physical. They spent hours talking, Ethan asking questions that made Jennifer feel truly seen. "What makes you happiest?" he asked one evening, his fingers tracing patterns on her arm as they lay tangled on the couch. Jennifer hesitated, the question catching her off guard. "I don't know," she admitted. "It's been so long since I thought about what I wanted." "Then let's figure it out," Ethan said, his gaze steady. "I want to know everything about you." Jennifer's chest tightened. Ethan's words were intoxicating, but they also scared her. He was offering her something she hadn't felt in years. Attention, passion, and the promise of something more. The danger of their affair heightened its intensity. Jennifer became adept at lying to Mark, crafting alibis that felt increasingly hollow. "How was your afternoon?" Mark asked one evening, glancing up from his laptop. "Fine," Jennifer replied, forcing a smile. "Just ran some errands." Mark nodded, his focus already shifting back to his screen. Jennifer's stomach twisted. He trusted her implicitly, and she hated herself for exploiting that trust. One afternoon, as Jennifer and Ethan lay entwined in bed, he broached the subject of her marriage. "Have you thought about leaving him?" Ethan asked, his voice cautious but firm. Jennifer stiffened, the question cutting through the warmth of the moment. "It's not that simple," she said, avoiding his gaze. "Why not?" Ethan pressed. "You deserve to be happy, Jennifer. You deserve to be with someone who sees you for who you are." Jennifer sighed, her chest tightening. "I don't know if I'm ready for that kind of upheaval." Ethan cupped her face, his eyes searching hers. "You can't keep living like this, divided. You need to choose." His words lingered long after she left, the ultimatum hanging over her like a storm cloud. The routine of their affair began to feel fragile, the cracks in Jennifer's double life threatening to break it apart. The thrill of being with Ethan was undeniable, but so was the fear of what might happen if their secret was exposed. One evening, as Jennifer sat in Ethan's apartment, her phone buzzed with a text from Mark. "Where are you?" Her heart raced as she stared at the screen, guilt flooding her veins. "I need to go," she said abruptly, grabbing her things. Ethan watched her with a mixture of frustration and understanding. "You're going to have to face this sooner or later," he said softly. Jennifer nodded, her throat tight. "I know." That night, as she lay in bed beside Mark, she stared at the ceiling, her mind racing. Ethan's words echoed in her ears, and she knew he was right. She couldn't keep living this way, balancing on the edge of a lie. But the thought of unraveling everything, her marriage, her family, her life, was almost too much to bear. The affair with Ethan had turned Jennifer's life into a delicate balancing act. Each lie she told, each moment she spent in his arms, pushed her closer to the edge. Yet the thought of giving him up was unbearable. But the danger was growing. The small town she lived in was no stranger to gossip, and whispers began to reach her ears. Unspoken suspicions that people couldn't quite articulate but lingered in their glances. Jennifer told herself it was paranoia, but the pit in her stomach said otherwise. The first tangible crack appeared when she found a note slipped under her car windshield. "I know what you're doing. End it or everyone else will too." Her heart raced as she read the words. There was no signature, no indication of who might have written it. When she showed it to Ethan, his jaw tightened, and his calm demeanor gave way to anger. "Someone's trying to scare you," he said, pacing the room. "We can't let them control us." "But what if they're serious?" Jennifer asked, her voice trembling. Ethan stopped and looked at her, his expression hard. "Then we figure out who it is, and we deal with them." A week later, the threat became more personal. A package arrived at Jennifer's doorstep, a manila envelope with no return address. Inside were photos of her and Ethan, their bodies close, their faces unmistakable. Jennifer's hands shook as she flipped through the images, her breath catching at the final photo. A close-up of them kissing outside Ethan's apartment. There was a note with the photos, $10,000. Cash. Or your husband gets these. Jennifer's stomach twisted as she stared at the demand. This can't be happening, she whispered, her voice cracking. Ethan's reaction was swift and furious when she showed him the photos. Whoever this is, they're watching us, he said, his fists clenched. We need to fight back. But how? Jennifer asked. By refusing to give in, Ethan said. His tone was determined, but Jennifer wasn't convinced. The situation spiraled further when Jennifer received a second note in her mailbox a few days later. This time, it wasn't just a threat. It was a demand with a deadline. You have until Friday. Don't test me. The fear became suffocating, and Jennifer found herself unraveling. She couldn't focus on anything, her family, her errands, her life. The constant weight of impending exposure loomed over her. Mark began to notice her distraction. You've been acting strange lately, he said one evening, his brows furrowed. Is something wrong? No, Jennifer said quickly, forcing a smile. Just stressed about everything. Mark didn't look convinced, but he let it go. Jennifer and Ethan tried to figure out who could be behind the blackmail. Vanessa, her nosy neighbor, was an obvious suspect, but there was no concrete proof. Ethan suggested confronting Vanessa directly, but Jennifer couldn't stomach the thought of it. Whoever it is, they're counting on you to panic, Ethan said, his tone firm. We can't let them win. But the pressure proved too much. When Friday came, Jennifer found herself sitting in her car outside a park, an envelope of cash clutched tightly in her hands. The blackmailer had chosen the location, a secluded bench near the woods. Jennifer's heart pounded as she scanned the area, waiting for someone to approach. When Vanessa appeared, Jennifer's worst fears were confirmed. You? Jennifer asked, her voice trembling with disbelief. Vanessa smirked, her arms crossed. You didn't think I'd notice you sneaking off all the time, did you? It wasn't hard to figure out where you were going. What do you want from me? Jennifer demanded. Money for starters, Vanessa said bluntly. And maybe a favor or two down the line. It'd be a shame if Mark found out about your little extracurricular activities. Jennifer's hands tightened around the envelope. You're disgusting. Vanessa shrugged. Maybe, but you're the one cheating on your husband. Jennifer shoved the envelope into Vanessa's hands and stormed away, her mind racing. That night, Jennifer sat in the darkness of her living room, the weight of her choices pressing down on her. She knew the situation was spiraling out of control, but she didn't know how to stop it. Ethan texted her, but she didn't reply. For the first time since their affair began, she felt truly alone. The following days were a blur of tension and dread. Jennifer knew Vanessa wouldn't stay quiet forever. Even with the payment, the leverage she held over Jennifer was too tempting to ignore. Ethan tried to reassure her, but his words rang hollow. The situation was slipping out of their control. Jennifer's worst fears came to life during a neighborhood block party that Mark insisted they attend. It was meant to be a casual gathering, a chance to unwind, mingle, and escape the monotony of their daily lives. But Jennifer couldn't shake the gnawing anxiety in her chest. Vanessa was there, of course. She floated through the crowd with a smug expression, her eyes darting toward Jennifer every so often. Each glance felt like a ticking time bomb. As the evening wore on, Mark joined a group of neighbors by the grill, laughing and sipping beer, seemingly oblivious to Jennifer's nerves. She stayed near the refreshments table, hoping to avoid Vanessa, but it was futile. Enjoying the party? Vanessa's voice came from behind her, dripping with feigned politeness. Jennifer stiffened but forced a smile. It's fine. Good, Vanessa replied, her tone sharp, because I think things are about to get a lot more interesting. Jennifer's stomach dropped. What are you talking about? Vanessa leaned in, lowering her voice. You didn't think I'd let you off that easy, did you? Some secrets are just too juicy to keep quiet. Don't do this, Jennifer pleaded, her voice trembling. Vanessa's smirk widened. Watch me. Moments later, Vanessa clinked her glass with a fork, drawing the attention of the crowd. Everyone, can I have your attention for a moment? She called out, her voice cheerful but laced with malice. Jennifer's heart pounded as the chatter died down and all eyes turned to Vanessa. I just wanted to say how wonderful it is to live in such a close-knit community. Vanessa began, her gaze flicking toward Jennifer. Where we all know each other so well. Sometimes a little too well. The crowd chuckled, but Jennifer's blood ran cold. Take our lovely Jennifer here, for instance. Vanessa continued, her smile razor-sharp. Did you know she's been spending an awful lot of time with her photographer friend? Ethan, was it? Gasps and murmurs rippled through the group as Vanessa pulled out her phone, holding it up for everyone to see. On the screen were the incriminating photos, the ones Jennifer had paid to keep hidden. Mark's laughter stopped abruptly as he turned to look at Jennifer. Confusion and hurt etched across his face. What is she talking about? He asked, his voice low but demanding. Jennifer opened her mouth to speak, but no words came. The weight of the truth crushed her. Mark, is it true? Mark's voice cracked, his expression shifting from confusion to anger. You're having an affair? The crowd was deathly silent, all eyes fixed on the unfolding drama. Mark, I'm so sorry, Jennifer whispered, tears streaming down her face. Mark shook his head, stepping back as if her words were a physical blow. You've been lying to me this whole time? Please, let's talk about this somewhere else, Jennifer begged. No, Mark snapped, his voice rising. You've already humiliated me. Why stop now? The confrontation continued, raw and public. Jennifer's pleas fell on deaf ears as Mark demanded answers, his voice breaking with betrayal. Neighbors whispered and avoided eye contact, the gossip spreading like wildfire. Ethan, who had been conspicuously absent from the gathering, texted Jennifer later that night. I'm so sorry. I didn't think it would come to this. Jennifer didn't reply. She sat alone in her bedroom, the house eerily quiet after Mark had stormed out. Her double life had finally collapsed, leaving her exposed and vulnerable. For the first time, she realized that no matter how much she had wanted to feel alive, the cost of her choices had been far too high. Jennifer hadn't heard from Mark since the block party. The house felt emptier than ever, his absence a constant reminder of the devastation she'd caused. Even her children, who had been staying with their grandparents that week, were a source of dread. She knew they'd return to a family forever changed. Ethan, meanwhile, had become relentless. He texted constantly, asking to see her, trying to reassure her that they could move past the fallout together. But Jennifer was no longer sure. The weight of their affair had shifted, and the passion she once felt now seemed tainted by the damage it had caused. One evening, Jennifer agreed to meet Ethan at his apartment. She arrived with a heavy heart, unsure of how to articulate the feelings swirling inside her. Ethan greeted her at the door with a warm smile, but his expression quickly turned to concern when he saw her face. What's wrong? He asked, guiding her inside. Jennifer hesitated, her eyes darting around the familiar space that had once felt like a sanctuary. Now it felt suffocating. I don't think I can do this anymore, she said finally, her voice trembling. Ethan frowned. Do what? This, Jennifer said, gesturing between them. Us. Ethan's expression darkened. You don't mean that, he said firmly. I do, Jennifer replied, her voice breaking. This affair has destroyed everything. My marriage, my family, my life. I don't even recognize myself anymore. Ethan stepped closer, his eyes pleading. We can get through this. You and me together. I told you I'd stand by you. Jennifer shook her head, tears streaming down her face. But at what cost? Mark's gone. My kids are gonna hate me when they find out. And you. She stopped herself, but Ethan pressed. And me what? You used me, Jennifer said, her voice rising. You knew I was vulnerable and you took advantage of that. You encouraged me to lie, To betray everything I stood for, because it served your needs. Ethan's jaw tightened. That's not fair. I cared about you. I still do. Maybe, Jennifer said, her voice softening. But that doesn't change what this has become. Ethan's demeanor shifted, his warmth replaced by frustration. So what? You're just going to walk away? Pretend none of this ever happened. I don't have a choice, Jennifer replied. I need to fix what I can of my life, and that starts with ending this. For a moment, Ethan stared at her, his expression unreadable. Then, with a bitter laugh, he said, You think Mark's going to take you back? You think you can rebuild everything after what you've done? Jennifer flinched, his words cutting deeper than she wanted to admit. I don't know, she said honestly, but I can't keep living like this. Ethan's anger gave way to desperation. Jennifer, please, he said, his voice breaking. Don't do this. I need you. Jennifer looked at him, her heart aching. She had loved the way Ethan made her feel. Alive, desired, free. But now all she felt was regret. I'm sorry, she whispered, turning toward the door. Ethan didn't try to stop her as she left, but the weight of his gaze followed her all the way to her car. That night, Jennifer sat alone in her darkened living room, the silence deafening. She had cut ties with Ethan, but the damage from their affair remained. She didn't know if she could salvage her marriage or her family, but for the first time, she felt a glimmer of hope that she could salvage herself. The divorce proceedings were nothing short of brutal. Mark's pain and anger were palpable in every interaction, and his lawyer made no effort to soften the blows. Jennifer sat in the sterile courtroom, her hands trembling in her lap as she listened to the accusations. The evidence of her affair laid bare for all to hear. The photos Vanessa had exposed were presented as irrefutable proof of her infidelity. The messages between her and Ethan were read aloud, each one a knife twisting in the wound. Jennifer's cheeks burned with humiliation, but she knew she couldn't deny the truth. Mark's voice cracked as he testified about the betrayal he felt, the trust she had shattered. I thought we were a team, he said, his tone raw. But the woman I loved was living a life I didn't even recognize. Jennifer wanted to respond, to apologize, but her lawyer advised her to remain silent. The courtroom battle wasn't just about the dissolution of their marriage. It was about the life they had built together. Mark fought to keep the house, arguing that Jennifer's actions had forfeited her right to it. He wanted full custody of the children, claiming her affair proved she was unfit to provide a stable home. Jennifer's lawyer argued for shared custody, but the weight of the evidence against her made it an uphill battle. In the end, the judge ruled in Mark's favor. He retained the house, and Jennifer was granted limited visitation rights with the children. The decision left her hollow, her worst fears realized. The fallout of the divorce rippled through every aspect of Jennifer's life. Friends she thought she could count on distanced themselves, their loyalty lying firmly with Mark. Her family, deeply ashamed of the public scandal, offered little support. Her mother's words, delivered in a terse phone call, still echoed in her mind. You made your bed, Jennifer. Now you have to lie in it. Even Ethan had disappeared from her life. After their breakup, he had stopped calling, stopped texting. The man who had once promised her everything had left her to face the wreckage alone. Jennifer moved into a small apartment on the outskirts of town, the walls bare, the furniture secondhand. She took a job at a local bookstore, the hours long and the pay modest, but it was all she could manage. Nights were the hardest. She would sit alone in the silence, scrolling through photos of her children, longing for the life she had lost. One evening, she opened a letter from Mark's lawyer, a final reminder that the divorce settlement required her to cover a portion of the legal fees. The weight of it all threatened to crush her, but she forced herself to breathe. Months passed, and while the pain remained, Jennifer began to rebuild. She started attending therapy, confronting the choices that had led her here. She wrote letters to her children, apologizing for the hurt she had caused, though she couldn't yet bring herself to send them. For the first time in years, she focused on herself, not as a wife or a mother, but as a woman trying to find her way back to some semblance of peace. One afternoon, as she walked through the park near her apartment, She saw Mark with the kids. They were laughing, chasing each other through the grass. Jennifer's heart ached with longing, but she didn't approach. Instead, she sat on a nearby bench, watching from a distance, letting herself feel the full weight of what she had lost, and the faint glimmer of hope that one day, she might find a way to make amends. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments, and do not forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel.